Hello everyone. So this is to continue and finish our demonstration that we started in class today. So for those of you who were not here, I did post the recording from class under announcements, but I just want to briefly review what we did. So we're drawing a flower with a dark background, and that flower was posted under announcements as well. And so it is an orange daisy with a pretty dark background. So what we did is we lightly drew the daisy, the outline with our pencils, and then we covered that in resist or masking fluid. I personally, my tip is broken that I used to squeeze out. So I just used the backside of my paintbrush to dip into the resist and just sort of spread out. But you can also buy resist brushes and or little tiny spatulas to use with it. So I completely let that dry. And once the resist is dry to the touch, then we came over and we added our background. So for the background color, we used a mixture of, for the outside, the outer portion that's a little bit darker, we used, I believe it was it burnt umber, ultramarine blue to create our blackish color. And then for the inside, right in here where it's a little lighter, we used burnt sienna with a little bit of alizarin crimson, just a tiny bit of yellow ochre. So what I did was I wet the background first, then added the dark around the edges, and then added that center color, working pretty quickly while it's still wet, so that you have that soft transition. Once that was dry, it was a little bit lighter than I wanted since watercolor always dries a little bit lighter. It's honestly still lighter than the photo, but I'm okay with it. But what I did is I added another layer on top of it of a little bit of my burnt umber with a little bit of burnt sienna on top. I'm trying to remember if I added a little bit more of my alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue too. You can kind of just play around with mixtures and see how warm you want it, how cool you want it, etc. So I added that layer on once that first layer was totally dry. And now, and then I rubbed off my resist. So this is just paper. I rubbed off my resist with my finger, but they also have little rubber things that that sometimes come with the bottle of resist. That kind of look like an eraser, but it helps to peel it off. And I would probably recommend that because this time was a little harder to get off with my fingers. Okay, so what we're gonna do is that the flower is orange around the outside, and then it gets lighter toward the center. These petals in the foreground that are coming toward us are a darker orange, and there's a little bit of a pink center. So I'm gonna mix up an orange color. Let's see. I might use, I'll start with some lemon yellow and Scarlet Lake since I don't have an orange, and we'll see how that turns out. I can always add colors if I need more. So lemon yellow, when you add these two colors together, the yellow is much more subtle, and the red is much more dominant. So I'm gonna need a lot of yellow and just a tiny bit of red to make an orange, because it will tint that color very quickly. So I always add just a little bit at a time. You can see just how like one little tiny drop really changed that color. And I actually think that's pretty close to what we're looking for. So it looks to me like there's a little bit more of a lemon yellow in toward the center, or you can just leave it white. I like the look of the yellow. So I'm just gonna get as much paint off as I can here. And there's a few ways to do this, but I think let me use this clean water here. That's why I have two, because one gets a little bit dirtier. Okay. So I know that and I can kind of pencil in. I lost some of my drawing when I added the resist. So just so I know where these petals in the foreground are gonna be, they're almost like upside down triangles. Okay. That's maybe a tiny bit high. Just want it a little bit lower. Okay. So now you probably can't see that because I can barely see it, but that's okay. So what I'm going to start with is I just dabbed my brush to about here in the water. So, and then I'm picking up some yellow, and I'm going to just wet my petals first and then add in my darker color. Just want to make sure that there's a tiny bit of resist on here still. Get that off. Okay. Whew. All right, so maybe doing, let's see. I think if I work quickly enough, I can do all the petals at a time. If you know that you paint a little bit more slowly, then maybe consider just doing a couple petals at a time. Okay, so I just added in my really light yellow, and now I'm gonna pick up my orange color, and I'm looking at where that color really lays down. So it's toward the bottom of this front petal and the bottom half of the second petal, but I want to show some of that, adding a tiny bit more red to this mixture so it's a bit more potent. Let's see. And this one, almost the whole thing is covered in orange, but it's a little bit lighter. So I'm going to pull from this lighter area that I created. And I am making my strokes in a downward motion toward the center of the flower, just to sort of create some texture here. You can see I messed up with the resist here, and I went a little out of line. So I can just bring a little bit of brown back into that later. Not a huge deal. And let's see. So just starting from the outer edge of the petal, looking at where the most orange is, or where it's the darkest, and just making little strokes toward the center. This is a little bit more potent toward the bottom half again, where that top half is catching light. And I did not count the petals, so this is not a perfect representation, but that's okay. And now in some areas, it's a little brighter where we have a separation of petals. Let's see. Well, that was maybe a little too bright. But that's okay. I'll just add a few more. Separation of petals is a little bit darker. So I'm just using straight Scarlet Lake, and I just pulled a tiny bit from my well. I didn't add more water. I just pressed the tip of my brush to the well, and add to the page. And since it's still somewhat wet, my edges are a little bit fuzzy still. That's totally fine. All right, and then if you want to create that bright pink toward the center, I'm just gonna pick from my quinacridone rose, because that looks like a pretty accurate color. And while this is still damp, I'm just gonna add some of those little, let's see. Some of those little areas. And then, let's see, in the foreground, we have our darker petals. Not really the foreground, but the area that's closest to us. So I might mix a little bit more of a darker yellow, like my cadmium yellow, with my Scarlet Lake. And I'm not using very much water. You can see how bright this color is. And just lay down some of these petals maybe just a touch of water. So when I added more water, I just put the very tip of my brush in there. All right, even though I'm painting some upside down triangles, you can't really see what I'm doing because it's sort of blending in with those pinks that are already there. Let's see. And I'm just bringing it like halfway down. This part's gonna be green. Maybe I'll add a touch of, just a touch of blue, and so barely touching the tip of my brush to my ultramarine blue and adding it to just a small little section of my orange. I'm not adding more water or anything. And I'm just gonna lightly, I don't know if this is gonna work or not, but just to sort of outline that petal. And when I say I outline the petal, I'm not bringing it around the whole thing. I'm just looking, where is it a little bit darker? And it looks like it's a little darker around the edges. I think that helped a little bit. Let's see. And I think my painting could use a little bit more color. I might add a little bit more yellow and a touch of orange in some of these areas once this is dry. And then I'm also gonna come in and clean up some of these edges too. But while that's drying, I will work on some of these greens. So the green is much darker where it's attached to the flower, and then the stem is a little bit lighter. And it also has a little bit of white along the sides of it. So I wanna be sure to incorporate that. Whoops, I thought there's a pile of brown in my green. I don't know how that got there. Sometimes if your paints dry up, they flake off and hop into other wells. I guess that's how it got there. All right, so I'm adding my sap green right here. So I think my stem is gonna be just sap green, and I'm gonna add a little bit of alizarin crimson to this green, and maybe a little bit of ultramarine blue too. So maybe I'll do the stem first then, since that's a little bit lighter. And if I want it just a touch lighter, I'll add a little bit of water to my brush, dab it on the paper towel so it's a little bit more dry, and then bring that here. And maybe I want a little bit of color. I'm gonna add a tiny bit of yellow, even though I don't really see it in the photo. I just think it would be fun, and it'll create a little bit of a softer edge here. So I just dabbed my brush in the lemon yellow, and it just creates a softer transition that's kind of pretty. And it also looks like there's a little bit of a halo around this green part of the flower too. I need to learn more flower terminology because I don't know what that's called. Okay, so this is this color. So sap green, a little bit of alizarin crimson, and just a touch of ultramarine blue. Makes a nice, dark, ugly color, but that's okay. I think it'll look pretty on here. So I'm actually gonna add the most of this dark color toward the top right in here, and then it looks like it gets a little bit lighter green as we go a bit further down. And I'm not going all the way to the edges because I want that little highlight around the edges to stay there. And now just picking up some of my sap green, touch of water, just dipping the tip, and blotting on my towel, and then adding some of that green back in. All right, I think that's kind of fun. Maybe even adding a little bit of Scarlet Lake toward the top of this green, or outlining some of that green could be kind of fun. let's see, maybe adding a touch more yellow or red around the edges too. Let's see. Ooh, I kind of like the red in here. That's fun. I don't see it in the picture. I'm just making it up, but sometimes you gotta do that. All right, that is totally optional though. So now, let's see. Okay, I'm gonna darken this a little bit. So I'm gonna add, I don't know about darken, just make it more vibrant. So I'm gonna add a little bit more lemon yellow. I'm gonna, excuse me, a little bit more of a lemon yellow mixture. Just go right over the top. This is a glaze since we're painting over something that's already been painted. You can see how it just warms it up a little bit. And then once that's down, now I have a wet surface. If I want to add any more orange in any areas, just to brighten it up a little bit. Whoop. And try not to knock your water over while you're doing it. And try not to drink from your paint water. That's always the hardest part for me. Okay. So let's see here. If we want to make some of this a little bit brighter, we can activate a little bit of our white gouache. And add a little bit of that in. So I just want to remind you that white gouache usually comes out much brighter on the page and then it fades away. So just know that you might need several layers if you want it to be, if you want it to stand out a little bit more. Let's see, and maybe some highlights right in here. Kind of fun. Okay. Surround some of the edges. I'm just looking where it's lightest. And then can also add, we'll try and separate this orange from some of that red. I don't know if it's gonna work, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just sort of add that little lighter tip to the edge and then add a little yellow on top of it. And we'll see if that separates it enough where you can tell the difference between the petal that's coming toward us and that bright center of the flower. This this pink was just a little bit overwhelming, and I think we lost some of the petals in here. But now, let's see, I'm just gonna add a little bit more pink, a little higher. Okay, there is a little bit of like a darker center thing happening. So I'm mixing up my favorite mixture, which is burnt umber and ultramarine blue. I love doing this for a black. I hardly have any water, just dipping the very, very tip of my brush in the water. And then just doing a few little dots in the center. You can see that the photo reference actually has some yellow in there as well, which is gorgeous. So I might add a little bit of that yellow. I don't know how much it will show up against the, that pink, but I don't have very much water on my brush. If I did, it would create blooms, which we don't want. Okay, not an exact replica, but I think it's pretty close. So what I'm going to do now is a little tricky, but I want to try to cover that area where I really can see where I messed up with the resin, or sorry, with the resist. It went a little bit past the edge. So I'm just really lightly gonna add in that brown color. But you have to be very, very meticulous with it. I'm just using the very edge of my brush. My brush is so thin right now. I even slicked it down with my fingers. There's hardly any water on here. And just kind of coming along the edge to, you can even sort of outline it if you want to soften the edge a little bit, but not necessary. Let's see, just a little bit right here. I don't want to outline the whole thing because I don't, when you totally outline an image, it sort of flattens it. Okay, I think that's good enough. And then the last thing is I'm gonna paint in these leaves real quick. So I think the lighter part is probably just a sap green. So I just have a tiny bit of water on my brush, bring it to the well, really dig around in that green, and then I just dab it on my paper towel to get some of that extra paint off. And so these aren't very bright. Most of the attention goes to the flower, and I want to keep it that way. And then they sort of just blend into the darkness. So I'm gonna add a little bit of ultramarine blue, maybe just a touch of burnt umber to the bottom of these guys to really darken them up. All right, and there you have it. You can add a little bit of resist if you wanted to really punch up that highlight on these, but I don't know, I kind of like it a little bit darker like this. I think the only thing I want to do is fix this little area right here. All right, and there is your flower. Kind of a fun and different technique.